Hi guys, today we are going to find out what if the atomic bomb was never created. You're standing in Princeton, New Jersey, in the summer of 1939, watching Albert Einstein stroll through his garden, completely absorbed in contemplating the mysteries of space and time. The world teeters on the brink of global war, but Einstein's mind drifts toward pure theoretical physics rather than practical applications. In our timeline, Leo Szilard convinced Einstein to write that fateful letter to President Roosevelt, warning about German atomic research. But here, you witness Einstein politely declining Szilard's urgent request, choosing instead to focus on his unified field theory. You probably won't survive what's about to unfold, because without that single piece of paper, history takes a dramatically different and deadlier turn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and local time. I'm curious where in the world you're watching from. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. You watch as Szilard walks away disappointed, carrying the weight of unheeded warnings while Einstein returns to his peaceful equations. You find yourself in Washington, D.C. in late 1939, watching government officials dismiss scattered reports about German uranium research as academic curiosity. Without Einstein's prestigious signature lending urgency to atomic warnings, Roosevelt's administration treats nuclear physics as irrelevant to wartime strategy. You observe military planners focusing entirely on conventional weapons, bigger tanks, faster planes, more powerful explosives, while atomic science remains purely theoretical. The billions of dollars that would have funded the Manhattan Project instead flow toward massive conventional military production and traditional research programs. You witness American scientists continuing their peacetime academic pursuits, publishing papers freely without realizing they're sharing potentially dangerous knowledge with enemy researchers. Oak Ridge, Tennessee remains a quiet farming community instead of becoming a secret uranium enrichment facility employing thousands of workers. Los Alamos stays a remote boys' school rather than transforming into America's most classified scientific laboratory where brilliant minds would have raced against time. You watch as Enrico Fermi conducts his nuclear pile experiments at the University of Chicago purely for academic understanding, not weapons development. The sense of atomic urgency that drove Allied scientists to work 18-hour days simply never materializes in this timeline. You realize that America enters 1945 with overwhelming conventional military superiority, but completely ignorant of the nuclear revolution quietly brewing in enemy laboratories. You're aboard a transport ship in November 1945, part of Operation Downfall, as 2 million Allied troops prepare to invade Japan's home islands. Without atomic weapons to force surrender, you watch the largest amphibious assault in human history unfold across Kyushu's beaches. The Japanese have spent months fortifying every coastal position, turning cities into fortress complexes designed to bleed invaders white. You witness kamikaze pilots launching desperate attacks against the invasion fleet, their suicide missions intensifying as foreign boots touch sacred soil. Operation Olympic, the Southern Assault, costs 100,000 Allied casualties in just the first week as Japanese defenders fight with fanatical determination. You trudge through Kagoshimima's smoking ruins, realizing that every building conceals snipers and every basement hides explosive booby traps. Civilians armed with bamboo spears attack your unit, following government orders to resist the foreign invasion to their final breath. The planned spring invasion of Tokyo Bay, Operation Coronet, looms ahead like a nightmare, promising even bloodier urban warfare. You calculate the horrifying mathematics. Military analysts predict 1 million American deaths and 10 million Japanese casualties before this war ends. By Christmas 1945, you're still fighting house to house through Japanese cities, wondering if this nightmare will ever conclude. You're crouched in a Tokyo subway tunnel in March 1946. 4 months into the bloodiest urban combat in human history, Japanese resistance has transformed every city block into a killing field, with defenders using suicide tactics that make the Pacific Island campaigns look merciful. You watch elderly Japanese civilians emerge from basements clutching grenades, choosing death over occupation in scenes that haunt your nightmares. The Japanese government broadcasts daily messages encouraging total resistance, declaring that national honor demands every citizen die fighting rather than surrender. You navigate through Osaka's rubble-strewn streets, where snipers have turned children into decoys and schools into ammunition depots. American flamethrower teams clear building after building, but Japanese defenders simply retreat deeper underground into prepared tunnel networks. You realize that conventional bombing campaigns have only strengthened Japanese resolve, creating martyrs rather than breaking their will to fight. Medical Corps reports flood headquarters with casualty numbers that dwarf D-Day, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa combined. By summer 1946, you're part of an exhausted army grinding through Japan's industrial heartland. Victory measured in city blocks rather than strategic objectives. You begin to understand why Japanese commanders planned this strategy, making occupation so costly that invaders would eventually negotiate rather than continue the slaughter. You're in Moscow's secret research facility in August 1947, witnessing Soviet scientists celebrate their successful atomic bomb test 2 years ahead of our timeline. Without American nuclear competition driving their urgency, Stalin's researchers worked methodically, perfecting their design while the West bled in Japan. You watch Lavrenti Beria personally congratulate Igor Kurchatov as mushroom clouds bloom over the Kazakh desert, marking the dawn of Soviet nuclear monopoly. The world's first atomic weapon belongs exclusively to the USSR, fundamentally altering global power dynamics in ways that terrify Western intelligence agencies. You observe Stalin's growing confidence as reports arrive describing America's ongoing quagmire in Japan, where casualties mount daily without resolution. Soviet diplomats suddenly speak with unprecedented authority, knowing they possess the ultimate trump card in international negotiations. You witness panic in London and Washington as intelligence services confirm the unthinkable. Only the Soviets have cracked atomic secrets. Churchill and Truman frantically authorize crash nuclear programs, but you realize they're starting from scratch while Soviet engineers perfect delivery systems. The Cold War begins with America desperately trying to catch up rather than maintaining nuclear parity, creating entirely different strategic calculations. You sense the profound shift as Soviet nuclear scientists become the most powerful people on Earth, holding civilization's fate in their equations. You're sitting in a tense NATO meeting in 1948, watching Western leaders grapple with Soviet nuclear blackmail for the first time in history. Stalin demands complete Western withdrawal from Berlin, backing his ultimatum with the implicit threat of atomic annihilation. You observe Truman's advisors debating impossible choices: surrender Berlin or risk nuclear war, with no ability to retaliate in kind. The Marshall Plan faces Soviet opposition as Moscow threatens any nation accepting American aid with potential nuclear consequences. You witness European leaders walking a diplomatic tightrope, desperate to rebuild while avoiding Stalin's atomic wrath. Finland's neutrality becomes the model as smaller nations realize they cannot afford to choose sides in this lopsided nuclear standoff. You watch communist parties across Western Europe gain unprecedented influence, knowing Soviet atomic protection makes revolution seem safer than resistance. The Berlin airlift proceeds under constant nuclear threat, with every cargo plane potentially triggering World War III and atomic holocaust. You see American generals privately admitting their conventional forces mean nothing when the enemy can vaporize entire armies instantly. By 1949, you realize the world has entered an era where one nation's nuclear monopoly creates global paralysis rather than decisive victory. You're in a British nuclear laboratory in 1952, watching scientists frantically work around the clock to break the Soviet atomic monopoly. Britain detonates its first nuclear device 3 years later than in our timeline, finally giving the West a nuclear response capability. You observe France accelerating its own atomic program, realizing that nuclear weapons have become essential for maintaining international relevance. China's nuclear development receives unexpected Soviet assistance, as Stalin views atomic proliferation as weakening Western influence rather than threatening Soviet security. You witness India beginning nuclear research earlier than expected, driven by fears of Chinese atomic capabilities on their border. Israel secretly launches its nuclear program with French cooperation, convinced that regional survival depends on atomic deterrence. You watch as nuclear technology spreads more rapidly than in our timeline, with desperate nations viewing atomic weapons as insurance against Soviet dominance. Pakistan begins nuclear research immediately after India's program becomes apparent, triggering the world's first nuclear arms race between neighboring nations. By 1960, you count 8 nuclear powers instead of the 5 that existed in our timeline, creating a far more dangerous multipolar atomic world. You realize that delayed American nuclear development has paradoxically accelerated global proliferation, as nations seek protection through atomic self-reliance. You're witnessing the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957, but this time, Khrushchev's space program carries the additional weight of nuclear supremacy. The space race unfolds differently as America struggles to match Soviet achievements while simultaneously playing nuclear catch-up. You observe how Soviet confidence in their atomic monopoly initially made them less aggressive in space, viewing rockets primarily as missile delivery systems. American desperation to prove technological superiority drives massive space investments, turning NASA into both a scientific and propaganda operation. You watch Soviet cosmonauts orbit Earth while American nuclear scientists still work to achieve parity in atomic weapons design. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 becomes far more dangerous, with Soviet nuclear experience giving Khrushchev unprecedented confidence in nuclear brinksmanship. You witness Kennedy facing impossible choices, knowing America's newer nuclear arsenal lacks the proven reliability of Soviet atomic weapons. The moon race intensifies as both superpowers recognize space superiority as compensation for nuclear imbalances. You observe how America's delayed nuclear development paradoxically accelerated their space program, creating unexpected technological breakthroughs. By 1969, you watch American astronauts plant flags on lunar soil, while both nations maintain massive nuclear arsenals in an even more precarious balance. You're standing in a 1970s nuclear power plant, watching how delayed weapons development paradoxically accelerated peaceful atomic energy research. Without early atomic weapons consuming uranium supplies, civilian nuclear programs receive better materials and more consistent government support. You observe nuclear power plants coming online faster in this timeline, as governments view atomic energy as strategically essential rather than merely economical. The oil crises of the 1970s hit less severely, with many nations already running extensive nuclear power grids established during the previous decade. You witness environmental movements taking different shapes, as nuclear energy appears less threatening without the psychological shadow of atomic warfare. Medical nuclear technology advances more rapidly, with isotope production benefiting from larger civilian nuclear infrastructure and research funding. You watch developing nations pursue nuclear power more aggressively, seeking energy independence while avoiding the military implications that dominated our timeline. Nuclear waste storage solutions develop differently, with governments investing more seriously in long-term disposal when atomic energy isn't tainted by weapons associations. You observe fusion research receiving increased funding earlier, as nuclear energy maintains better public relations without atomic bomb imagery. By 1980, you realize this timeline has created a world more dependent on nuclear energy, but paradoxically more comfortable with atomic technology. You're standing in today's world, contemplating how that single decision in Einstein's garden reshaped the entire trajectory of human civilization. Modern warfare looks fundamentally different, with conflicts resolved through massive conventional battles rather than nuclear deterrence and proxy wars. You observe international relations operating under different rules, where military strength depends on industrial capacity and population rather than atomic arsenals. Climate change discussions take on altered dimensions in a world more heavily dependent on nuclear power from an earlier period. You witness terrorist organizations pursuing different strategies, unable to threaten nuclear catastrophe, but potentially accessing other weapons of mass destruction. Space exploration advanced differently, driven by superpower competition rather than nuclear missile technology, creating alternative paths to the stars. You realize medical advances accelerated in unexpected directions, with nuclear medicine developing sooner, while radiation treatment evolved along different lines. The psychology of an entire generation changed, growing up with different fears and different hopes about humanity's technological future. You contemplate whether this world avoided nuclear catastrophe or merely delayed it, as more nations eventually joined the atomic club. Standing at this crossroads of history, you understand how one man's choice between theoretical physics and practical warnings changed everything humanity became. As you step back from this alternate timeline, the weight of individual choices becomes staggeringly apparent. One brilliant physicist choosing theoretical research over practical warnings created cascading consequences that rippled through decades of human experience. Perhaps millions more died in conventional warfare, yet paradoxically, the world may have avoided nuclear annihilation entirely. You realize that history balances on knife edges we rarely recognize, where momentary decisions by single individuals reshape the destiny of entire civilizations. This timeline reminds us that technological progress isn't inevitable. It depends on specific people making specific choices at specific moments. The atomic age arrived regardless, but its character, timing, and consequences transformed completely based on when and how nuclear science emerged. You understand that our current world, with all its nuclear anxieties and atomic deterrence, represents just one possible path among infinite alternatives. Every generation inherits choices made by previous ones, then makes new decisions that will echo through future decades in ways they can barely imagine. Einstein's garden conversation never happened in our reality, but countless similar moments did. Quiet decisions that changed everything. Looking at our own timeline, with nuclear weapons that both terrify and potentially preserve peace, what single moment from recent history do you think most dramatically altered the course of human civilization?